Richard, darling, you really shouldn't worry your brilliant head about the small things. Just keep making the money, and I'll keep making us look perfect. That's our deal, isn't it? My wife, Melanie Kings, said those words while adjusting my silk tie in the mirror of our penthouse. She was radiant, the kind of beauty that felt curated by a museum. For 7 years I believed her. I was the architect of Silicon, a man who built indestructible encryption codes, yet I was living with a woman who was a walking encrypted file. I didn't realize that in her eyes I wasn't a husband. I was a mark. The realization didn't come with a scream. It came with a vibration. A week before our 15-year high school reunion, Melanie left for her daily Pilates session. She was usually meticulous, but that morning she was rushed. Her designer gym bag was left on the marble island, zipped halfway. As I reached for my espresso, a cheap plastic flip phone, the kind you buy at a gas station with cash, slid out of the side pocket and hit the floor. I stared at it. Melanie didn't use cheap anything. I picked it up. There was no passcode. The screen lit up with a single unread message from a contact saved only as K. The mark is complacent. The 15th is the finish line. Once we're at the reunion, the transfer triggers. Don't get cold feet now, Sarah. My blood turned to ice. My wife's name wasn't Sarah, and the 15th was the date of our high school reunion, the event she had been obsessively planning for months. What would you do if you realized your entire marriage was a long con? If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with your life, hit that subscribe button right now. We're about to show you how a billionaire takes his life back piece by piece. Drop reckoning in the comments if you want to see Melanie's empire crumble. I didn't confront her. In my world, if you reveal your hand too early, you lose the game. I put the phone back exactly where I found it. An hour later, I was in my private office staring at a blank monitor. I am Richard North. I built a $100 million empire by seeing patterns that others miss. I started looking back at the patterns of my marriage. Every vacation we took was to a country without an extradition treaty. Every charity Melanie supported was a shell company I had never personally audited. She had insisted on a joint bank account for our household expenses, which I had funded with a $10 million floor, never bothering to check the outgoings. To me, it was pocket change. To a con artist, it was a war chest. I called Marcus, my head of security and a former intelligence officer. Marcus, I said, my voice steady despite the roar in my ears, I need a full deep dive on Melanie Kings, not the bio she gave the newspapers. I want her birth certificate, her school records, and her dental files. Start with the name Sarah. Is there a problem, sir? Marcus asked. I think I'm married to a ghost, Marcus. Find out whose grave she climbed out of. 3 days later, Marcus walked into my office and laid a thin manila folder on my desk. He looked uncomfortable. The Melanie Kings you married graduated from Riverside High 15 years ago, just like you, Marcus began. But there's a problem. The real Melanie Kings was involved in a high-speed chase 3 months after graduation. The car went into a lake. The body was never recovered, but she was declared legally dead in 2012. I felt the room tilt. Then who is the woman living in my house? Her name is Sarah Jenkins, Marcus replied, sliding a photo across the desk. It was a grainy mugshot from a precinct in Florida. It was her, the same eyes, the same jawline, but looking hungry and desperate. She was a small-time grifter who disappeared right around the time the real Melanie's identity was stolen. I didn't feel fear. I felt the sharp, cold thrill of a hunt. I wasn't going to just divorce her. I was going to erase Sarah Jenkins. The private jet touched down in Riverside with a gentle thud that felt like a gavel striking a desk. Melanie reached over and squeezed my hand, her diamond-encrusted wedding band catching the light. "Home sweet home," she whispered, her voice a perfect blend of nostalgia and warmth. "Are you ready to see everyone, Richard? You've become such a giant since we left this little town. They won't even recognize the shy boy you used to be." "I'm a completely different man, Melanie," I said, holding her gaze. "You have no idea how much I've changed." She smiled, that practiced, effortless curve of the lips that had fooled me for a decade. She didn't notice the slight coldness in my eyes. To her, I was still the predictable husband, the golden goose she was about to slaughter. We were met at the airfield by a sleek black Maybach. The driver was a man I'd never seen before, with a thick neck and a military posture. Melanie had insisted on local security for the weekend, claiming she wanted to support small businesses in town. In reality, I knew from the mirror server on her phone that this driver was on Kyle Vance's payroll. As we drove through the familiar tree-lined streets of Riverside, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A silent notification from Marcus. The accident site has been identified. Old Mill Road, Saturday night post-gala, a sharp turn with a 50-foot drop into the ravine. They've already weakened the guardrail. I looked out the window. We were passing the very spot. I didn't see a scenic view. I saw a crime scene. Our destination was the Riverside Manor, a historic hotel that Melanie had booked out entirely for the reunion. As we stepped into the lobby, the air changed. The golden boy himself was waiting for us. Kyle Vance hadn't aged like a normal person. He still had the athletic build of the quarterback he used to be, though his eyes were harder now, hooded with the cynicism of a man who had spent 15 years living on the edge of the law. He walked toward us with his arms open, a wide, predatory grin on his face. "Bar Richard North, the man, the myth, the billionaire," Kyle boomed, clapping a hand on my shoulder. His grip was a little too tight, a subtle test of dominance. "And Melanie, you look even more beautiful than the day you left." For I watched them, the accidental brush of their fingers as they shook hands, the micro-expression of relief on Melanie's face. They were high on the adrenaline of their own plot. They thought they were the smartest people in the room because they were playing a game I wasn't supposed to know existed. "Kyle," I said, my voice calm, "I heard you stayed local, coaching the high school team, right? It must be a quiet life compared to the tech world." It has its moments," Kyle said, his eyes flickering to Melanie, "but I like to keep things exciting. We're planning a big finale for the reunion gala, something nobody will ever forget." "I'm counting on it," I replied. That evening, Melanie went down to the hotel spa, leaving me alone in the suite. I immediately opened my laptop and patched into the hotel's security grid. I had spent the flight gifting the hotel a free upgrade to their Wi-Fi, a Trojan horse that gave me eyes and ears in every hallway. I saw them on the monitor. Melanie and Kyle meeting in the service stairwell. "Is the sedative ready?" Kyle's voice was distorted by the small microphone, but the words were clear. "Bar yes," Melanie replied. Her voice wasn't the sweet melodic tone she used with me. It was sharp, cold, and efficient. "I'll drop it in his champagne toast at the gala. He'll be conscious enough to stay in the passenger seat, but too lethargic to fight back when the car goes over. By the time the autopsy happens, the sedative will be written off as a high dosage of his usual sleep aid. A tragic accident caused by stress and exhaustion." "And the real Melanie Kings?" Kyle asked. "The girl's brother is getting restless," she hissed. "He wants another $50,000 to keep his mouth shut about the car switch 15 years ago. Once Richard's trust clears into my account, pay him off and then handle him. I don't want any loose ends." I leaned back, the blue light of the screen reflecting in my eyes. It was all there. Identity theft, murder for hire, extortion. I had enough to go to the police right now, but that wasn't the plan. The police would take years to untangle this. The court system would allow them to hire expensive lawyers. I didn't want a trial. I wanted a total eclipse of their lives. I opened a secure channel to Marcus, the brother, the one blackmailing Sarah. "I want him picked up tonight. Don't hurt him, just buy him. Tell him I'll pay him double what they promised, but he has to show up at the gala. I want the ghost of Melanie Kings to have a witness." "Understood, sir," Marcus replied. "What about the sedative?" "Let her switch the bottles," I said, a dark smile playing on my lips. "But we're going to swap the contents. If she wants me to have a restful night, I think it's only fair she joins me." I closed the laptop as I heard the suite door click. Melanie walked in, wrapped in a plush robe, smelling of lavender and betrayal. "The spa was wonderful, honey," she said, leaning over to kiss my cheek. "You look tired. You should really try to get some sleep. We have a long weekend ahead of us." "You're right, Melanie," I said, pulling her into a hug. I could feel her heart beating against my chest, fast, erratic. She was terrified and excited. "I think I'm going to sleep better than I have in years." The Riverside High Gymnasium had been transformed into a sea of maroon and gold. Banners hung from the rafters, and a wall of fame displayed the faces of the class of 2011. Melanie, or Sarah, walked through the crowd like a queen returning to her province. She knew every name, every scandal, and every secret. She had studied the real Melanie's life so well she could recite her childhood memories better than a sister could. "Look at us, Richard," she whispered, grabbing a flute of champagne from a passing waiter. "The quarterback, the head cheerleader, and the nerd who conquered the world. It's like a movie. Movies usually have a twist in the third act, don't they?" I asked conversationally. She paused, her glass halfway to her lips. "What do you mean? Nothing. I just mean that people aren't always who they were in high school. Take Kyle, for instance." I nodded toward Kyle Vance, who was surrounded by a group of fawning boosters. "He looks like a success, but I ran a quick background check on his coaching firm this morning. Lots of debt, lots of unexplained losses. It's funny how some people spend their whole lives trying to maintain an image that's already dead." Melanie's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Well, that's why we're here, isn't it? To help our old friends." We moved toward a group of former classmates. Among them was Cindy Walters, who had been the real Melanie's best friend since kindergarten. I had spent the previous night memorizing Cindy's social media. "Cindy, you haven't changed a bit," Melanie gushed, leaning in for a fake air kiss. "Neither have you, Mel," Cindy said, though her eyes were squinting at my wife's face. "But I was telling the girls, I can't believe you finally got that mole removed from your left shoulder. You used to say it was your birthmark of destiny." Melanie froze. I watched her brain fire at 1,000 miles per hour, searching the Melanie Kings database she had built in her head. "Oh, that? Yes," Richard insisted. "He's so protective of my health." "Actually," I chimed in, leaning closer to Cindy, "I don't remember any mole, Melanie. But then again, there are a lot of things about your past that seem to have vanished. Like that old car of yours, the one you loved so much in senior year. What was it, Cindy? A blue Mustang?" "A red cabriolet," Cindy corrected, looking confused. "Mel, you cried for 3 days when you scratched the door. Don't you remember?" "Bar, of course I do." Melanie laughed, though the sound was brittle. "I just haven't thought about that old thing in years. Richard, honey, let's go find our table. I think the music is too loud for a trip down memory lane." Brr, she pulled me away, her grip on my arm tight enough to bruise. As soon as we were out of earshot, she hissed, "What is wrong with you tonight? You're acting like an interrogator." "I'm just interested in your history, Sarah," I said. She stopped dead. The color drained from her face so completely she looked like a statue. What did you call me?" I blinked, feigning confusion. "I said, honey. Why? What did you hear?" She stared at me, her chest heaving. She was searching my face for a sign of the truth, but I had spent years perfecting a poker face for boardroom takeovers. After a long beat, she forced a laugh. "I thought you said something else. I must be more stressed about this reunion than I thought." "Bor, you should relax," I said, patting her hand. "The gala is tomorrow night. That's when the real fun starts." Bor, I watched her walk toward the restroom, her gait unsteady. I knew what she was doing. She was going to find Kyle. She was going to tell him that I was acting strange. She was going to move the timeline up. I adjusted my glasses, the ones equipped with the audio feed to her burner phone. I stepped out onto the balcony and listened. "He knows something." Sarah's voice was a frantic whisper. "He called me Sarah. At least I think he did. And he's asking questions about the car, Kyle. The car." "Burr, calm down," Kyle's voice growled. "He's just being a nostalgic drunk. He doesn't know anything. If he did, we'd be in handcuffs. The plan stays. Tomorrow night, after the toast, we take him to the old mill road. I've already got the stolen SUV parked in the woods nearby. It looks like a carjacking gone wrong. Simple." "It doesn't feel simple anymore," she whimpered. "It is simple," Kyle snapped. "Think about the money, Sarah. 50 million. You can be whoever you want after this. Just stay the course." I turned off the feed and looked out at the lights of Riverside. They were wrong. It wasn't going to be a carjacking, and it wasn't going to be 50 million. I pulled out my own phone and sent a message to the real Melanie's brother, the one Marcus had acquired earlier. "Meet me at the back entrance of the gym in 5 minutes. I have the first half of your payment, and I have the script for your big debut." The trap was closing. Sarah Jenkins was so worried about the Mark waking up that she didn't realize the entire gymnasium was becoming a cage. The air behind the gymnasium smelled of damp earth and old gym mats. I stood in the shadows of the loading dock, watching a man shuffle toward me. This was Leo Kings, the older brother of the girl who had disappeared 15 years ago. He looked decades older than he was, his face etched with the wear and tear of a man who had sold his soul one secret at a time. "You the one who sent the message?" Leo asked, his voice a gravelly rasp. He kept looking over his shoulder, his eyes darting toward the gym doors. "You look like the guy on the billboards. The billionaire." "I'm the guy who's tired of paying for lies, Leo," I said, handing him a thick envelope. "There's 20,000 in there. Just a down payment. I want the story Kyle and Sarah didn't tell me." Leo snatched the envelope, his fingers trembling as he tucked it into his jacket. "It wasn't a car switch, not at first. They told the cops she went into the lake on her own. But that wasn't how it happened. Pierre, tell me," I commanded. "Melanie, the real Melanie, she found out Sarah was stealing money from the cheerleading fund," Leo whispered, the words tumbling out like a confession. "They had a fight at the quarry. Kyle was there. He was Sarah's boyfriend even back then. Things got out of hand. Kyle pushed her. She hit her head on a rock. She didn't get up." My stomach turned. I had spent 7 years sleeping next to a woman who hadn't just stolen a name. She had stolen a life to cover a killing. "They panicked," Leo continued. "They put her in her own car and pushed it into the water. Kyle knew the lake bottom was silt. It would swallow the car whole. Then Sarah realized if Melanie was gone and her parents were dead, there was a whole life just sitting there. No one left to say she wasn't Melanie, except me, so they paid me. Every month for 15 years, Sarah sent me hush money." "And the body?" I asked, my voice cold. "Still down there," Leo said, looking at the floor, "in the deep end of the North Basin. They never looked that far out. Sarah even used Melanie's college fund to get her first apartment in the city. That's how she met you. She needed a big fish to hide behind. You're going to tell this story tomorrow night, Leo, I said. In front of everyone. Bar, they'll kill me, Leo hissed. Bar, no, I said, stepping closer. If you don't talk, I'll make sure the police find that car, and I'll make sure your fingerprints are found on the money Sarah's been sending you. You're an accomplice now, Leo, but if you walk onto that stage tomorrow, I'll give you immunity and enough money to leave this town forever. I left him shaking on the dock and walked back into the reunion. The music was playing a slow song, a classic ballad from our graduation year. I saw Sarah on the dance floor, her head resting on Kyle's shoulder. They were whispering, their bodies moving in a perfect synchronized lie. I didn't feel rage. I felt a surgical detachment. I pulled out my phone and messaged Marcus. Marcus, I need the heavy equipment. Get a dive team to the north basin of the lake tonight. Silent ops. I want that car located and marked, and call the state prosecutor. Tell them I have a witness and physical evidence for a 15-year-old cold case. I walked over to the dance floor and tapped Kyle on the shoulder. He stiffened, pulling away from Sarah with a forced grin. Mind if I cut in? I asked. I haven't danced with my wife all night. Sure thing, Rich, Kyle said, his eyes hard. She's all yours, for now. I pulled Sarah into my arms. She felt cold like marble. You're shaking, Melanie, I whispered into her ear. Are you okay? Just overwhelmed, she lied. Being back here brings up so many memories. Some of them are just heavy. I know what you mean, I said, spinning her slowly. The truth is a heavy thing to carry, but don't worry. Tomorrow night, we're going to lighten the load for everyone. She looked up at me, a flicker of genuine terror in her eyes. What does that mean, Richard? It means I've planned a special tribute for the gala, I said, smiling at her with the warmth of a shark. A tribute to the real Riverside High legacy. You're going to be the star of the show. I felt her hand tighten on my shoulder, her nails digging into the expensive fabric of my tuxedo. She knew. She didn't know what I knew, but she knew the mark was gone. She was trapped in a room full of people who loved a ghost, dancing with a man who was building her gallows. I leaned in one last time, my voice barely a breath against her skin. I hope you like the color red, Sarah. It's going to be the theme of the evening. Burra walked away, leaving her standing in the middle of the dance floor. I saw her look frantically for Kyle, but I had already signaled Marcus to move our security team into the exits. They weren't there to keep people out. They were there to make sure Sarah and Kyle couldn't leave. The stage was set. The script was written. And tomorrow, the architect of Silicon was going to delete Sarah Jenkins from the system forever. The morning of the gala arrived with a pale, cold sun that bled through the curtains of the Riverside Manor. I woke up early, watching Sarah, the woman I had called my wife, sleep. She looked peaceful, but I knew her mind was a hive of calculations. She was dreaming of a cliff, a car, and a bank account with 9 zeros. Good morning, darling, she murmured, her eyes fluttering open. She reached for me, but I was already standing by the window, my back turned. It's a big day, Melanie, I said. The foundation called. They've finalized the life achievement video for tonight. It's going to be the centerpiece of the evening. I can't wait to see it, she said, stretching like a cat. I'm so proud of everything we've built. I watched her through the reflection in the window as she reached into her vanity drawer. She pulled out a small amber vial. She thought I couldn't see it, but I'd installed a micro camera in the mirror the night before. She tucked the vial into the lining of her evening clutch, the one she intended to take to the gala. That was the sedative, the plan A that would make me too sluggish to fight when Kyle forced my car off the road. As soon as she went into the bathroom to start her 3-hour beauty routine, I moved. I opened her clutch and pulled out the vial. It was a potent, fast-acting benzodiazepine. In 10 minutes, I had replaced the liquid with a concentrated dose of a powerful, fast-acting sedative I'd procured through my own medical contacts, something that wouldn't just make her sleepy, but would render her completely immobile within minutes. I didn't stop there. I pulled out my tablet and checked the Icarus feed. Marcus and the dive team had spent the night at the North Basin. Sir, Marcus's voice came through my earpiece. We found it. Red cabriolet, submerged in 40 feet of silt. The license plate matches the real Melanie King's registration. And Richard. The skeletal remains are still in the driver's seat. The door was locked from the outside. I closed my eyes for a second, a cold shiver running down my spine. Locked from the outside. Sarah hadn't just watched her friend die. She had ensured she couldn't escape if she regained consciousness. Record everything, I said. Get the underwater high-def footage. I want the audience to see the rust on that door handle. I want them to see the betrayal in 4K. I spent the afternoon playing the role of the doting, oblivious billionaire. I walked with her through the hotel, shaking hands with board members and local politicians. I watched Kyle Vance across the lobby, looking at his watch every 10 minutes. He was nervous. The golden boy was starting to realize that once the deed was done, he would be at Sarah's mercy. At 6 p.m., the gala began. The ballroom was a masterpiece of black and gold. The who's who of the state was there, all waiting to see the local boy who had made good. Melanie looked stunning in a deep red gown. The color of blood, I noted. She was the picture of the grieving widow-to-be. She stayed close to me, her hand never leaving my arm, as if she were tethered to her prize. "Richard," she whispered as we sat at the head table, "I think it's time for our traditional pre-speech toast, just the two of us, to a long and happy life." Percy signaled the waiter. The one I knew was on Kyle's payroll. He brought over 2 glasses of vintage champagne. I watched her hand dip toward her clutch. With the grace of a professional magician, she palmed the vial and emptied the contents into my glass while adjusting the centerpiece. "Br. To the future," she said, raising her glass. "To the truth," I replied, raising mine. We both drank. I watched her eyes for the moment of triumph. She thought she had just sealed my fate. She thought the mark was finally going down. What she didn't know was that I hadn't switched the vials. I had switched the glasses. While I had pretended to sneeze and reach for a napkin, I had used a rotating table mechanism I had installed under the tablecloth. A simple gear shift that swapped our flutes in the blink of an eye. "You look a little flushed, Melanie," I said, leaning in. "Is it the heat in here?" "I'm fine," she said, but her voice was already starting to slur. Her pupils were beginning to dilate. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. I need to sit down for a moment." "No, darling," I said, standing up and pulling her to her feet. The microphone was already being handed to me. The spotlight swung around, blinding us in its white glare. "The show is starting, and you wouldn't want to miss your big debut." I led her to the center of the stage. She was leaning heavily on me now, her legs becoming leaden. Kyle was standing at the back of the room, his face turning ashen as he realized she wasn't following the script. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice booming through the silent hall. "Tonight, we celebrate 15 years of Riverside High. But more importantly, we celebrate the endurance of the human spirit and the secrets that stay buried, even at the bottom of a lake." I hit the remote in my pocket. The massive screen behind us flickered to life. It wasn't the slideshow of our wedding. It was the sonar image of the red car. The ballroom went silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. On the 40-foot screen behind us, the sonar image shifted into high-definition underwater footage. The light from the divers' torches cut through the murky green of the North Basin, revealing the skeletal remains of a red cabriolet. What is that?" someone from the front row gasped. I felt Sarah's weight increase. Her breathing was shallow, ragged. The sedative was working its way into her central nervous system. She tried to lift her arm to grab the microphone, but her hand only twitched uselessly against her red dress. "That," I said, my voice echoing with a cold, rhythmic precision, "is the final resting place of the real Melanie Kings, the girl who was supposed to be the pride of this town, the girl who didn't disappear to start a new life, but was discarded like trash because she knew too much." I looked toward the back of the room. Kyle Vance was moving toward the exit, his face a mask of panicked sweat. "Going somewhere, Kyle?" I asked into the mic. The spotlight followed my gaze, pinning the golden boy against the oak doors. 2 of Marcus's men, dressed in tactical gear, stepped out from the shadows and blocked his path. "This is a lie!" Kyle screamed, his voice cracking. "North, you've lost your mind. That car could be anyone's." "Is that right?" I turned back to the screen. The footage zoomed in on the door handle. The lock pin was clearly down, jammed tight from the outside. "Then perhaps we should ask someone who was there. Someone who's been living on blood money for 15 years. I gestured to the side of the stage. Leo King stepped out. He looked small in the glare of the lights, his old jacket frayed at the cuffs. He looked at his sister's car on the screen, and for the first time, I saw a flash of genuine grief on his face. "Berleo," I said, Tell them about the night at the quarry." Berleo didn't look at the crowd. He looked directly at Sarah, who was slumped in a chair I had pulled out for her. Her eyes were wide, pinned open by the drug, watching her world dissolve. "It was her," Leo pointed a trembling finger at Sarah, "and Kyle. They had a fight. Sarah wanted Melanie's life. She wanted her name, her parents' insurance money, her future. Kyle helped her do it. They pushed that car into the lake while Melanie was still breathing. I saw it. I saw it all, and I let them pay me to stay quiet." The room erupted. People stood up, some shouting, some weeping. The perfect image of the North family was being incinerated in real time. "Richard, please," Sarah managed to choke out, the words slurring into a messy pile of vowels. "Don't Richard me, Sarah," I whispered, leaning down so the microphone wouldn't catch it. "That's not your name. Your name is Sarah Jenkins. You're a thief, a fraud, and a murderer, and the Mark just closed your account." I stood up and addressed the crowd again. "I invited the state prosecutor tonight. He's waiting in the lobby with the original dental records of Melanie Kings. In about an hour, the divers will finish recovering the remains, and the forensic match will be official. But I think we have enough evidence right here, don't we?" I pulled the burner phone from my pocket and held it up. This phone contains the logs of every conversation between Sarah and Kyle for the last 6 months. Conversations about my accident, about how they were going to force my Maybach off Old Mill Road tonight. They even picked out the spot. Kyle lunged at the security team, a desperate, animalistic attempt to break free, but he was tackled to the floor. The golden boy was pinned to the same carpet where he had been celebrated as a hero only hours before. Sarah's head lolled back. She was fully conscious, but her body was a cage. She had to sit there, immobile, as the people she had lied to for 15 years walked up to the stage to look at her with pure, unadulterated loathing. "You thought I was the Mark," I said, standing over her. "You thought because I was brilliant, I was blind. But you forgot one thing, Sarah. I'm an architect. I don't just build systems. I know exactly where to place the charges to bring the whole building down." I turned to the audience, my voice dropping to a calm, terrifying low. "The gala is over, but the reckoning has just begun." The double doors of the ballroom swung open, but it wasn't more guests arriving. It was a phalanx of state troopers and forensic investigators, led by a man in a sharp gray suit, District Attorney Vance, no relation to Kyle, a man who had built his career on taking down untouchable criminals. "Kyle Vance, Sarah Jenkins," the DA announced, his voice slicing through the murmurs of the crowd. "You are under arrest for the first-degree murder of Melanie Kings, conspiracy to commit murder, and multi-million-dollar wire fraud." The crowd parted like the Red Sea as the officers moved in. They hoisted Kyle from the floor, his face a bruised mess of tears and arrogance. When they reached the stage, they looked at the woman in the red dress. Sarah was still slumped in the chair, her eyes darting frantically, her muscles beginning to twitch as the paralysis of the sedative started to wear off, replaced by the crushing weight of reality. "She's had a bit too much of her own medicine," I told the officers, handing over the vial I had recovered from her clutch. "I'd suggest a stomach pump before you take her to the precinct. I want her fully awake for her arraignment." As they began to lift her, I raised my hand. "Wait, one more thing." I turned back to the massive screen. The sonar image of the car was gone, replaced by a legal document with the North Global corporate seal. "Sarah," I said, leaning close so she could hear me over the chaos, "you spent 7 years as my wife. You thought that gave you a claim to my life, my trust, and my name. But a marriage built on a stolen identity isn't a marriage. It's a contract signed in bad faith. Legally, you were never my wife. You were an intruder." I tapped a command on my tablet. "I filed for a total annulment 3 hours ago. Because you committed identity theft to enter the marriage, the Slayer rule and the fraudulent inducement statutes apply. Every cent I ever put into that joint account, every piece of jewelry on your body, the $200,000 necklace you're wearing right now." I reached out and unlatched the diamond necklace from her neck. She couldn't even pull away. "It's all being clawed back," I continued. "I've frozen every offshore account you and Kyle thought you had hidden. I bought the banks, Sarah, or at least I bought the people who run their compliance departments. You aren't just going to prison. You're going to prison as a pauper." The crowd watched in stunned silence as the billionaire's wife was stripped of her finery. The troopers draped a standard-issue wool blanket over her shoulders, covering the designer silk. She looked small. She looked like the grifter from the Florida mugshot again. "Richard," she rasped, her voice finally returning in a broken, pathetic croak. "I loved the life. We were a team." "We weren't a team," I said, watching her being led toward the stairs. "I was the architect. You were just a bug in the code. And I finally finished the debug." As they dragged her and Kyle out, the room began to breathe again. But I wasn't done. I turned to Leo Kings, who was still standing on the edge of the stage, clutching his envelope of cash. "Leo," I said, "the police are going to want to talk to you. You're a witness, but you're also an accomplice. If you tell them everything, exactly how they pushed that car into the lake, I'll make sure my lawyers keep you out of a cell. But the money stays with the Melanie Kings estate. It's going to fund a search for other missing girls in this state. It's time you stopped eating off your sister's grave." Leo nodded, his head hanging low, as a detective led him away. I stood alone on the stage, the spotlight still burning bright. The town of Riverside was looking at me, not with admiration but with a new kind of fear. They realized that the shy boy hadn't just grown up, he had become something far more dangerous than any of them could imagine. I looked at my watch, 11:30 p.m., the time I was supposed to be at the bottom of a ravine on Old Mill Road. "Marcus," I said into my earpiece, "is the car ready?" Waiting at the back entrance, sir, Marcus replied. Where to? The lake, I said. I want to see her come home. The night air at the North Basin was thick and heavy, smelling of pine needles and stagnant water. Large industrial floodlights mounted on the back of salvage trucks sliced through the darkness, turning the surface of the lake into a shimmering, bruised purple. I stood at the edge of the pier, my tuxedo jacket discarded in the back of the Maybach. For the first time in 7 years, I felt like I could breathe. The hum of the hydraulic winches was the only sound, a steady mechanical rhythm that felt like a pulse. Coming up now, sir, Marcus whispered, standing a respectful 5 feet behind me. Slowly, the surface of the lake broke. First came the roof, caked in 15 years of dark, heavy silt. Then the windshield, shattered inward from the pressure. And finally, the flash of faded, rusted red bar as the crane swung the car onto the flatbed. The smell hit, the smell of time, decay, and a secret that had finally run out of oxygen. I walked toward the vehicle. The police photographers were already snapping flashes, the white light illuminating the driver's seat. There she was, or what was left of her, Melanie Kings. I looked at the skeletal hands still gripped near the steering wheel. I thought about the girl she was, the girl I had a crush on in 10th grade, the one who was kind to everyone, even the nerds like me. She had been extinguished, so a parasite like Sarah could have a penthouse and a diamond necklace. She was 22, I said, more to myself than to Marcus. She had a life, a family, and a future. Sarah didn't just kill a person, she erased a destiny. I reached out and touched the cold, wet metal of the door. The lock pin was still jammed down, the physical manifestation of Sarah's cruelty. Richard? I turned. It was Cindy Walters, the best friend from the mixer. She had followed us to the lake, her face streaked with tears. She looked at the car, then at me. We all knew, she whispered, her voice trembling. Deep down we knew she wasn't the same, but we wanted to believe this a success story. We wanted to believe our friend had just grown up and become sophisticated. We were so busy being impressed by her money that we didn't notice she had a different soul. That's how people like Sarah survive, I said. They use our own vanity against us. They know that if they give us enough champagne and status, we'll stop asking questions. My phone buzzed. It was a live feed from the precinct. Sarah was being processed. The sedative had worn off and she was screaming, not out of guilt, but out of fury. She was demanding her lawyer, demanding her rights, still trying to play the part of the powerful Mrs. North. I watched the video for a moment, then deleted the app. Marcus, I said, I want a memorial built here, right on this spot. A park. Something for the people of this town to remember that the truth always comes to the surface. And I want the King's family home, the one Sarah let fall into foreclosure, bought and restored. We'll turn it into a shelter for displaced women. Consider it done, sir, Marcus replied. The Maybach is ready. Your flight leaves in 2 hours. I looked at the lake one last time. The water was still now, the ripples from the car's recovery finally smoothing out. I felt a strange sense of closure. I hadn't just caught a criminal, I had rescued a memory. Goodbye, Melanie, I whispered. As I walked back to the car, I felt the weight of the last 7 years fall away. I was still a billionaire. I was still the architect of Silicon. But I was no longer a mark. I got into the back of the Maybach and pulled out my tablet. I had one more thing to do before I left Riverside. I had to ensure that even if Sarah Jenkins survived prison, she would never be able to use the name Melanie ever again. The city skyline was a jagged crown of glass and steel as the helicopter touched down on the North Global rooftop. I didn't head to the penthouse. I went straight to the server room, the cold, humming heart of my empire. Status, I said, my voice cutting through the chill of the liquid-cooled racks. The purge is at 90%, sir, my lead systems architect replied. We've pulled every image of her from the corporate site. We've scrubbed her from the Foundation's history. And per your instructions, we've triggered the identity reset on all social platforms. I watched the monitors. Thousands of photos, gala appearances, vacation candids, wedding portraits were being replaced by a simple black and white graphic of the Florida mugshot of Sarah Jenkins. I wasn't just divorcing her, I was unmaking her. By the time the world woke up, the elegant Melanie North would be a digital ghost, replaced by the face of a common criminal. Sir, Marcus interrupted, stepping into the blue light of the servers. I just got a call from the Riverside County Jail. Kyle Vance is talking. He's terrified of the needle, and he's trying to cut a deal. What could he possibly have left to trade? I asked. He claims Sarah wasn't just targeting you for your money, Marcus said, his face grim. He says she was working for someone else, someone who wanted the backdoor access to North Global's encryption protocols. He has a name, the Vanguard Group. Your eye froze. Vanguard wasn't a criminal gang. They were a rival tech conglomerate, a multinational shark that had been trying to buy my company for years. If Sarah was a corporate spy inserted into my life 7 years ago, this wasn't just a murder. It was industrial espionage on a global scale. "Get him on the secure line," I commanded. A moment later, Kyle's face appeared on a screen. He was in a small, concrete room, his orange jumpsuit clashing with his pale, trembling skin. "Richard, listen to me," Kyle shouted, leaning into the camera. "I didn't know about the killing at the lake. Sarah told me Melanie was already dead when I got there. But the plan to marry you, that wasn't Sarah's idea. Vanguard approached her in Florida. They gave her the files on Melanie. They coached her. They paid for her plastic surgery and her finishing school. She was a sleeper meant to get you to the altar and then get them the codes." "Why are you telling me this, Kyle?" I asked, my voice like a razor. "Because they're going to kill me," Kyle sobbed. "If I go to prison, I'm a dead man walking. Vanguard doesn't leave witnesses." "Give me a witness protection deal, Richard. Tell the DA to move me. I have the emails. I have the offshore routing numbers showing the Vanguard payments to Sarah before she ever met you." I looked at the man who had planned to watch me die in a ravine. He was a coward, a bottom feeder who had been outplayed by a woman who was outplayed by a corporation. "You'll get the same protection as any other inmate, Kyle," I said, leaning closer to the screen. "Which is to say, none at all, but I'll take those emails. If they're real, I might ask the warden to give you an extra hour of yard time." I cut the feed before he could reply. "Marcus," I said, turning to my head of security, "this changes things. If Vanguard is behind this, then my entire life wasn't a tragedy. It was a hostile takeover. I want every Vanguard asset audited, every board member followed, and I want the Sarah Jenkins files sent to the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice." I walked over to my desk and picked up a small framed photo. It was the only one I hadn't deleted. It was a picture of me and the woman I thought was Melanie, taken on the night I proposed in Paris. I had looked so happy, so safe. I took a lighter from my drawer and touched the flame to the corner of the photo. I watched the fire consume the expensive paper, the image of Melanie curling into black ash. "The mark is officially dead," I whispered. "Now it's time to meet the architect." I spent the rest of the night drafting a lawsuit that would liquidate Vanguard's stock. If they wanted my company, they were going to have to pay for it with their own blood. I was no longer just a victim of a bad marriage. I was a man at war with a shadow empire. The visiting room at the county jail was a stark contrast to the velvet-lined world Sarah Jenkins had inhabited for 7 years. The air smelled of industrial disinfectant and stale coffee. I sat on one side of the reinforced glass, waiting. When the door opened, the guards let her in. She wasn't wearing the red silk dress anymore. She was in a baggy orange jumpsuit that made her look frail. Her hair, usually a masterpiece of styling, was limp and greasy. Without the makeup and the lighting of the elite, she looked exactly like what she was, a tired, desperate grifter from a Florida mugshot. She sat down and picked up the phone. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but the defiance was still there. "Did you come to gloat, Richard?" she rasped. "To see the bug in your system before they ship me off?" "I came to tell you that Vanguard just declared bankruptcy," I said calmly. "The evidence Kyle gave me, the offshore routing numbers, the Project Trojan Horse files, it was enough. The DOJ seized their assets this morning. The people who built you are gone. You're truly alone now, Sarah." She flinched at the name. "I was Melanie for 7 years. I gave you the best years of my life. I made you a king in this city. You can't tell me none of it was real." "The only thing real about those 7 years was the money you stole and the girl you left in that lake," I replied. "I didn't come here to argue. I came here to tell you that the annulment is final. You are no longer Sarah Jenkins North. You are just inmate 8842nd. And I've made sure that the life achievement video I played at the gala is now the top result on every search engine for your name. You wanted to be famous, Sarah. Now you're immortalized as a cautionary tale." She slammed her hand against the glass, a scream of pure, unadulterated rage erupting from her throat. "I should have killed you the day we met. I should have finished it years ago." "But you didn't," I said, standing up, "because you were greedy. You wanted the trust fund more than you wanted the freedom, and that's why you lost." I hung up the phone and walked out. I didn't look back as the guards dragged her, kicking and screaming, back to her cell. 3 days later, I was back in Riverside. The town was quiet, the scandal of the reunion already settling into local legend. But today wasn't about the scandal. A white marble monument had been erected at the edge of the North Basin. It wasn't a corporate plaque. It was a simple, elegant statue of a young woman looking out toward the horizon, a book in her hand. Below it, in gold letters, read, "Melanie Kings, 1993 to 2011. The truth always rises. The entire town had turned out for the reinterment. Cindy Walters stood at the front, holding a single red rose. Leo Kings was there too, standing at the back, looking sober for the first time in years. As the priest spoke the final words, a soft rain began to fall, cleaning the dust off the new marble. I stood at the edge of the crowd, a black umbrella shielding me from the world. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Marcus. "The Vanguard liquidation is complete, sir," he whispered. "We've redirected 50% of their seized assets into the Melanie Kings Foundation for Missing Children. The first shelter opens next month." "Good," I said. "Let's get out of here, Marcus." We walked back to the Maybach. As the car pulled away, I looked out the window at the high school on the hill. For 15 years, this town had lived under a shadow. For 7 years, I had lived in a lie. But as the sun began to break through the clouds, reflecting off the lake, I realized that the architect had finally finished his masterpiece. I wasn't just a man with $100 million anymore. I was a man with a clean slate. I pulled out my phone one last time and looked at the North Global logo. I hit the reset button on the company's private internal server, wiping the last of the metadata associated with the name Sarah Jenkins. The screen blinked once, then went white. "Where to now, Mr. North?" the driver asked. I looked at the road ahead, stretching out toward a horizon that was finally clear. "Anywhere," I said, a genuine smile touching my lips after like a decade.